Welcome to the Idea Talks, where we discuss big ideas. The Idea Talks is a weekly podcast with Josh Tice and other leaders on big ideas for life, leadership, and ministry. And I'm your co-host, Drew Polvencia. For more information on this podcast, visit ideanetwork.church.
Hey man, this is the part of the episode where we're supposed to advertise my book.
All right.
So what do you think we should say?
I don't feel bad about it. It's not a shameless plug. It's literally your book. You've put a lot of work into it.
That's a good point. So you need to pick up a copy. And hey, here's the thing. If you buy a copy and you didn't like it,
right,
Drew said he'll pay for you to ship it back.
It's not what I said. At least an In-N-Out burger, I'll ship to them.
You'll ship them.
If it's on the East Coast, it'll be all spoiled, but it's fine. Hey, I'm in this book too.
You are. You're actually in this book. And I say some things that people don't know about you. It's going to be great. I tell some stories.
All right.
Are you?
Where can people find this book at?
Oh, that's right.
And what it's called.
Okay, so you can pick up this book.
Right.
It's called The Quest for Friendship.
The Quest for Friendship. Insert Galleon's music here.
That really is what it is.
Right. It's happening right now as we speak.
The Idea Network publishing arm of our network has produced this awesome resource, and I really do appreciate it. It's exciting. It really is a discussion of friendship, and I want you to pick up a copy at ideanetwork.church in the shop tab. It's the very first resource at the very top. You can pick it up, and if you put in the promo code free shipping is yours.
All right.
Yeah.
There it is.
Go do it now.
The Quest for Friendship. Welcome to this edition of the Idea Talks. On today's episode, we have a special guest, return visitor from early last year. Judging by just the downloads alone, a really popular episode we had last year.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It came out on Black History Month. It was a wonderful conversation about racial reconciliation with our dear friend, Kenny Baldwin. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But for those who are listening, we are so glad you're back for episode 104. Man, over 100, pal. How do you feel?
Old pros at this point, right?
I'm feeling I don't know about the pro stuff, but I am feeling the old part. I am feeling our age as the podcast continues to grow. And we're so glad that you are listening. We're going to have a great conversation here in just a moment. But man, am I excited about what's coming up next month. We are less than a month away from Idea Night 2021. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Very popular regional events that are like micro idea days. If you've ever been to one of our big events, they could range from 300 to 500 people easily. And these idea nights are more intimate, but still amazing content.
No, it's great. I mean, some of these locations probably have 7, 8, 10 pastors gathering around. Others up to 25, 30. They're really a lot of fun. And if you haven't yet signed up for one, you can do so at ideanetwork.church. Go to the website, check it out. All 45 locations are right there, and you can register to be at any single one of those locations. There's probably one within an hour or 2 hours of where you're at right now.
And you can even be a super fan. I don't know if you know this now. There's a super fan status.
What?
That you can go get merch for Idea Night. It's live on the Idea Network store.
I did not know about the Idea Night merch.
So ideanetwork.church/store.
Okay.
They got a couple t-shirts up there, some hats. Kylie's been hard at work. Our design team's been hard at work, and there's some awesome, it's a purple hue to it. Really awesome.
So you can go.
I haven't got mine yet, but I need to.
You can actually go and pick up a shirt and then wear the shirt to your Idea Night, and you'll look like a super nerd. I mean, a super fan, a super fan.
Yeah.
We are glad that you are going to be part of the Idea Night. So go check it out. We're going to have a great time. And whenever you're at the store, you can actually pick up a copy of The Quest for Friendship. That's not a bad idea. Self-promotional plug.
It's a great book.
It's a great book. The moment I read it, I realized this is a good book.
Or wrote it, one of the two.
Whoever wrote it, that's right. Now, today, speaking of friendship, I'm really thankful to introduce to you all my friend again, Kenny Baldwin. He's a dear pastor who's been serving his local community and his church for so many years. And like we said back in February, Kenny had the opportunity of being on our podcast, and man, that was such a blessing to us and many of the people within our community. We're really thankful for that. And I was speaking with Kenny recently about several things, race, racial reconciliation, and CRT, and all that's going on with racial prejudice and how to respond to that. And he actually made the decision to help us with our Idea Night, and he produced a lesson that's going to be coming out for Idea Night. It's going to be in many of the locations, not all of them. Everybody gets to pick 2 lessons, but many of the locations have picked. I know the one in Las Vegas has picked his session as one of the conversational topics. And he prepared a lesson, delivered it in 12 minutes, and then it goes to a roundtable conversation, which is the way an Idea Day or an Idea Night works. The problem is there was so much good content, so much worth hearing. I contacted Kenny back and I said, man, we've got to talk about this in more detail. Can I get you on the podcast? He said, absolutely. So I thought we'd get together. Kenny, how you doing, man? Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's an honor to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about anything that glorifies God and helps people. And so I'm humbled that you would ask these questions. And as I said, as I gave my lesson, I'm not an expert on anything, but I sure have a burden for people. And I want to see the kingdom of God built. And I think we've got to spend more time dialoguing these matters if we're going to maximize our potential. So thank you for letting that happen tonight. The honor is mine.
Well, we're really thankful that you're here. And, you know, I do feel awkward in that the only 2 times we've had you on the podcast is to talk about racial matters. But for those who know Kenny Baldwin, he is a preacher of the Word of God. And I want to have you back to talk about preaching sometime because I don't want to peg you into a corner that we're only talking about racial matters whenever we have a conversation. You're a preacher of the Word of God like very few that I've ever heard. We love hearing you preach. Our audience loves hearing you preach, so we'll talk about that at another time. But can you catch our audience up on how are you doing physically? For those who don't know, early in 2020, Kenny Baldwin was one of the very first friends that maybe you knew of, that I knew of, who actually contracted this new virus we've been hearing about, the coronavirus, COVID-19, back in March of 2020. And a lot of our audience was aware of that. How are you feeling? Give us an update on your health.
Well, first of all, thank you to everyone who prayed and who is praying. The best thing you could do for me was pray, and I do not take your prayers for granted. I believe I'm alive today because of the prayers of God's people and my family. So thank you for your prayers. It has been an interesting journey. I've never been sick in my life, never canceled a meeting for sickness. And here I'm battling effects of this now, nearly 15 months later. This was March, and now we are April, May, June, getting into July, and it's still here. So it's been a learning process for me. When I went into the hospital, I had 105-degree temperature and double pneumonia, and my oxygen dropped, and everything was going south. And I was one of those people that was not high risk. I wasn't older. I didn't have pre-existing conditions, all of these things. So for those who think, there's no risk, if that does not apply to you, be careful, because I was one of those that I never get sick. I never get sick. And so since God delivered me, did a miracle, got out of the hospital, we got out so early, everything after you get out of the hospital was closed. No rehab, no facilities, no doctor's offices. So we were just kind of thrown there, left to figure this thing out because they're too busy trying to get people out of the hospital. We can't deal with people who've already gotten out. So that's
right. I mean, it not only hit you hard. I mean, it hit you hard, but it hit you early. The doctors didn't even know what they were doing at that point, correct?
And they said that. Am I going to get better, doctor? I don't know. You're a man of faith, aren't you? Yes, sir. Well, you better hope for that. That's what the doctor said. This is what the pulmonologist says to me, who's standing at a distance for a very brief amount of time in a spacesuit and a mask, because that's how nervous they were. The nurse said, tell us everything you need before we come in every 4 hours, because we don't want to come back in any more than that, because we're at risk too. So it just, and then, I walk in the hospital and they say, we're going to test you. And they look at my wife, ma'am, you need to leave now and say goodbye. And I don't know, this is the last time I'm going to see her. She can't come visit. If it were not for FaceTime on the phone, I don't know if I'd have made it. I'm convinced that maybe if they would have let some family members mask up and gown up and go in the hospital, it may have given some patients some more hope, because it is lonely in there. And when you're fighting a virus that's new, that the doctors don't know what they're doing, and the news is saying, try this, and the nurses are in there, and your temperature won't drop, and it stays up, and they keep trying, and you're lonely. I mean, it's just a recipe to just give up. But God. And so here I am today. I'm still testing with a total lung capacity of 55%. They want you between 80 and 120. I have to believe, without a test to prove it, that I was optimal before that just because of how I use my lungs. And so now the process of bringing air into my lungs is restricted down to that level. And so it makes everything feel tight, which affects my preaching and my gait, the way I walk, and those kind of things just because of that. So we're working on that. There's, things you look at the brain, the brain doctor says, if I saw your brain, I think it was a 70-year-old brain, but that's COVID has affected you. And there are white spots on there that I believe, because it's just exclusive to COVID, that in time it will get better. So it's just a matter of prayer. He did all of that to bring me here. And I believe by his grace that he'll do it in his time. My motto is, God, you're a healer. I'm not going to be a holdup. So I'm going to do my part, and then you do yours. And if you want to wait on yours, I'm not going to wait on mine. I'll do everything I can and trust you to do the rest.
And if you don't mind mentioning, before you started press record today, you talked a little bit about, you always ask the situation, like, why did this happen, right? And you mentioned about, God's teaching a lot about empathy, during these situations. Go into that a little bit before we get into some of the deeper topics today.
Well, if I were rating myself before all of this, I would say I was a pretty empathetic person. My mom had cancer 3 times. My brother has heart disease. His heart stopped for 26 and a half minutes. I buried my mother-in-law a couple of years ago. I'm in the hospitals all the time. I feel like my bedside manner as a pastor is pretty empathetic because I've just seen a lot of hurt. But it just went to a different level. Waking up every day with the same thing for this long, it makes me think how quickly we dismiss the severity of what people go through after the big moment happens. The funeral, the surgery, the emergency, the bad news, the recovery, the miracle. It's like, move on. I had a church member say to me yesterday, because I'm back at church from my surgery, everybody thinks I'm fine. They come up to me and say, you ready for a race? They don't know how hard it is every single day. And I felt that. You can get frustrated thinking, I almost hesitate doing certain things because it's going to make people think you can do everything. And so it's given me a heart to ride it out with people through the long haul of their trial, because most of the crowd dissipates after the initial shock. So God's really helped me look more at me, not to be so harsh, to be more understanding, to be not only more forgiving, but to be even willing to seek forgiveness, because people hurt. And sometimes we have to slow down to notice that and listen.
Yeah. I can't help but think, I would never wish any hardship on anybody, but I can't help but think in the future how God's going to use that, in your life and ministry to help minister people who, you never had the opportunity before. So that's awesome to hear.
There was a time when I was preaching 65 meetings a year and wasn't missing any Sundays. I had missed about 3 Sundays in 17 years or so. So I was still back home on every Sunday, and I was on visitation and working this, that, and the other. If I had kept that schedule for the next 20 years, there are people I've met in the last year I would have never met. I met them because of COVID. They called me because they heard. I was on 3 to 4 news stations. I had an audience at my weakest moment in life, bigger than all the audiences combined at my strongest point in life. When I am weak, then am I strong. His strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I glory in infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. He has let me touch the lives of other people, and their lives touch me, that I would have never had an audience with had this not happened. Adversity has enhanced my ministry, my mindset, and my mentality single-handedly, probably more than anything has in my whole life. And it's been the hardest year of my whole life. And it's been the most intimate year with my master and my mate, my wife. And my children. It's been priceless. So God knew I needed it. I'm not complaining. I would wish it on anybody. I wouldn't have asked for it, but it's exactly what I needed. And all of this that we're talking about tonight happened while this was happening. And had I been on the circuit and not able to pastor my people through not only COVID, but racial tension and political unrest, they would have missed the shepherd that they needed the most.
That segues perfectly into the conversation that we're really having in this one. And the way I function in my mind, Kenny, is that I like to surround myself with people I trust foremost, people that I feel actually love Jesus, walk with God, understand the scripture, and view the world from biblical lenses. What I've been shocked about is that you can love Jesus, look at the world through biblical lenses, and still see things differently because we all have a different perspective. Now, we see this. I mean, we see this with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We've got 4 gospels, but 4 different perspectives on what happened with Jesus. And then when I don't fully grasp something, what's going on, which happens quite a bit, I like to go to those who I trust, who come from a biblical worldview, and say, hey, I got a question. I don't understand this. So instead of calling and just talking on the phone, I figured I'd call with all my friends. And I would say to you, please help us. The first question, I already sent them to you. You know what it is. It's a very simple question. What is CRT? And why am I being told to preach against it?
Well, let me say this. I'll answer the second part of your question first. Because we preach against anything that sounds remotely invasive against our traditional practices and views. I didn't say biblical. I said traditional practices and views. So anything that gives a hint of indicting what we have done long term is automatically dismissed. That doesn't mean that I espouse to everything that everyone says. For instance, these scholars that are civil rights leaders and activists who critically examine what United States law does as it intersects with race. In other words, it is formulated with premises and tendencies that disallow for justice racially, allow for progress across the board. Well, immediately we hear this and we think, wait a minute now. This is the land of the free and the home of the brave. Wait a minute now. We just had a president for 8 years who was African American. Wait a minute now. Look at all of the progress that we see in politics and look at these guys that have come from nothing and gone. So immediately, it can't be true because there's too much evidence to prove otherwise. I think when it comes to racial issues, and not just racial issues, but particularly, that we need to apply the biblical principle of being slow to speak, swift to hear, and slow to wrath. Because there's a lot that we say, even what we disagree with, deserves the respect to listen to at least why someone said it before I dismiss what someone said. In my opinion, CRT falls into a myriad of issues that churches and pastors hasten to respond to without being swift to hear. And that's why there's such a big divide, because Black folk, and remember now, I'm an independent Baptist pastor, been in church since nine months before I was born. This is all I know. Preached in 98, 99% predominantly white churches because of where I served, and that's the context. So let's not just say, well, I brought up racial issues in our movement to someone recently, and they said, well, what do you mean? Everybody calls everything racism. You're just saying that anybody that says that they like to carry a gun, or anybody that says the race. To me, that response is already saying, here's somebody who spent his life in white churches. Why in the world shouldn't I just get the credibility because I say racism exists, prejudice exists, to say, wow, I didn't know that. Help me. Mm-hmm. But there's an instinctive dismissiveness. Oh, we can't be racist. We cannot give any credence to a theory like this, because then it indicts us as a movement or as a people. And we're not about to do that, because that means we've got to admit we're wrong. Well, look at our churches and look how they look. We don't have to admit we're wrong. Everybody knows anyway. It's obvious.
Yeah.
So it's not like people are going to be surprised if we say we've done something wrong. The church is at the back of the line when it comes to racial reconciliation and integration. And please don't think this is a social conversation, because when we look at Revelation and what heaven's going to look like, it's going to be integrated. So integration is not a novel idea to God. It just seems to be novel to those of us who are supposed to be representing him. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I really resonate with the concept of, hey, look, I'm one of you. I've been in your churches. I've been in your conferences. I've been your friend. I know what it is to not only live my life, but believe and hold to the exact same values you do. We are family. There's also an aspect of our existence that you don't see because I've lived in a different part of my life that none of you have seen. If you trust me, if you're in my family and I'm in your family, why don't you naturally hear what I have to say and trust what I have to say? Because I'm not against you, I'm for you. And that's what you've been ultimately saying. I'm one of us. This is our family. Let me speak into an aspect that you are not yet aware. But here we are, and we want to pretend, no, we are aware. And in fact, we're so aware, we disagree before we even have that conversation. Is that the sense of what you're feeling?
Absolutely. And the problem is that premise is okay as long as I'm preaching the Bible, what they agree with. So we like your blackness in our white churches because it sounds like something we don't have. But we can like your blackness and simultaneously forget you're black. And I'm telling you, because I hear comments that people will say to me as if I'm not black because they've fallen in love with my blackness, but they consider me so much where they are that you're not like other blacks. They say stuff like that. You're different, thinking they're complimenting me when it's absolutely an insult. You're different than you're not Jesse Jackson, you're not Al Sharpton. What does that mean? What's that mean? Does that mean that I still don't pick up on your ignorant comments? No, just means I have a different name. And so watch this now. You are one of the best black preachers in America. That's a problematic statement. I've heard it 100 times. My dad got saved in 1976. Very few blacks in the church where he was. Right before he got saved in that predominantly white church, a black family wanted to join the church, and the pastor called around to get recommendations from other pastors, should he baptize them? And most of them said no. That was the scene my dad grew up in Tallahassee, Florida. He went to schools when they were integrated. He knew what it was to go to certain water fountains. My mother was on the DC in Washington, DC at the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. My dad knew what it was to want to get jumped because he was the first black boy at Winn-Dixie in Tallahassee, Florida. His dad worked for a white man that, charged him a bunch of money to do a whole bunch of work and, all of that stuff. He knows. He also knows what it's like to have white people sneak him in and let him watch the baseball game for the first time we're on a colored television. So we're not people that presume every white person is racist and black people know everything. That's not what we're saying. But when you've been black and around whites for this long, you have a balance that most don't have. And forget about it being me. I just think that it deserves an ear because it's possible that I can see some things from a perspective because of what God made me and who I've become in Christ that allows us to understand some things that we may not understand, just like going through COVID taught me so much because I've experienced it.
I love it. So, to put not too fine a point on it, you have an ear. Thousands of people listening to this episode. What do we need to know about CRT?
Well, here's what you need to know. You need to know that there are genuinely concerned people who feel like the system is bent a certain way and thus does not allow for equality. And here's what I'm saying. I'm not telling you to change your viewpoint on what you think about America and capitalism and freedoms and to dismiss every person you know who didn't have a chance who made it. Here's what I'm saying. Ask yourself why you don't have to have a conversation with your sons about what to do when you're stopped and you didn't do anything wrong. Well, he shouldn't have worn his pants this way. He shouldn't have had this hood. Wait a minute. I was a preacher's son in the community where my church was, riding around picking up teenagers and taking them to church. Twice I had guns pulled on me in a car. 5 times I was stopped for no reason. One guy said, "You got an air freshener on your rearview mirror." And just about everybody drove past did, me too. My brother-in-law told me, who's a police officer, that's one of the things we do when we want to stop somebody, to stop. He wanted to stop me because I was a black man driving a nice car, and that shouldn't be. Now, somebody's going to listen to this and go, "You don't know that." Well, okay. I've been around long enough to know, and the comments people make. I have a young man in my church who says, he's white. And he says, "I went to the mall with my black friend, and we both said we're going to walk around the same route in the mall to get applications for jobs." He said, "I came back with twice as many as he did because I was white." This is what a white guy said to me. So when someone says to me, "I don't want to hear this," it's absolutely contrary to our thinking. It's degrading to the United States of America. It's ridiculous. Wait a minute now. Let's be careful, because we're going to have to go and investigate who penned laws and what they came up with and what their thinking was when they did it. And let's watch what has happened in our world today. And all this happened with George Floyd and all of this and all. You know how many black folk were crossing their fingers? This is on video. Everybody could see it. And people are going, forget about what you think about it. The fact that people are going, I still don't think it's going to happen. I'm one of the people who said, I didn't think America would have a black president. I didn't think America would let it happen. And I've grown up as exposed to violence as anyone else. So I just think people need to listen. If you don't like CRT and the premise that it says, listen to people who believe it and ask them, why would you think it is? And ask them about their experiences. And if you can't agree with their position, have empathy for their experiences. And maybe you won't be so quick to dismiss something that is a result of the context of what people have gone through.
Empathy for their experiences so that you don't dismiss the content and the context of what they went through. That's brilliant. Beautiful. Here's the second question, follow up. Okay, so how do pastors interact with CRT and address racial prejudice?
Well, how are you going to have a conversation about prejudice in America and not have black people part of it? I just don't understand. I hear people having these conversations about we're doing everything about it. And here comes a whole dialogue of information. And the people affected the most, or at least up at the top, by this issue weren't at the table. I'm not saying that black people know more than them. I'm just saying, how are you going to talk about racial problems if you don't talk about the people who've been affected the most by it? So get the ear of somebody who's not going to compromise the substance of Scripture, but who has had enough experience culturally, circumstantially, to be able to be balanced enough to speak in a way that is enlightening. My dad is one of those folks who got saved and got in. You know, it takes a lot for a black man to go to a church of 1,000 people and be one of few. It takes a lot. I don't care what anybody says. But he did because it was the truth. But at some point, he realized, although he loved the truth, he could not get people that looked like him to come there to get the truth. That bothered him. That bothered him. And to this day, we heard all kinds of statements that came from people. I mean, there'd be people that came to our church years later that said, we've been wanting to come and we're scared to come to your church because the pastor told us, if you go to that church and take your daughters over there, Black men have more hormones than regular men, and they will mistreat your daughter if you expose. They were scared to join a Black church because of that. We had people come say, we've been trying to come, but we were told they'll never accept you. Our church is more diverse with non-Blacks than most white churches are with Blacks. Why? Because we don't have those same hangups. I'm not saying that Black people can't be racial or prejudiced. I'm saying the church has to have a conversation and has to get people at the table who can speak candidly and from an experienced perspective, as opposed to somebody just spouting off cliches. It's not the skin, it's the sin. Bless God, red and yellow, black and white, they're all precious in His sight. Well, then why do I hear preachers say all the time, I love Black people, but it sure gets under my skin when I see one of them Black guys with a white woman. What in the world is that? So we got to have the conversation with people who can say, this is what I'm feeling that you can't tell I'm feeling unless you ask me.
You talk about things that are constantly said, things that are trite, sayings that are just thrown out there. One of them is, do we really need to talk about race? The more we bring it up, the more problems we have. Why are we talking about this issue? And you really address this kind of head on in your session, Grace Matters. It's a play on words, isn't it? It's kind of a clever title. It's the idea that race matters, but you throw a G on the end of that, or at the beginning of that. Grace matters and race matters. So it's a clever title. What do you mean by this idea talking? What do you mean by race matters and grace matters?
Well, to me, race matters are grace matters. And the reason why we struggle so much with race matters is because we don't understand how much grace matters. And to me, it's a grace issue because grace doesn't care what your race is. And when we care so much about what someone's race is, we lack grace. So my premise is to dismiss talking about it is to dismiss grace. For the grace of God that brings salvation hath appeared to all men. So if you're going to talk about grace, you got to talk about it to every race. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, every ethnic group. For by grace are you saved. How can you talk about the grace that salvation brings and how it comes only by grace and not talk about people groups and ethnic groups that are excluded from that same grace? And we go to John chapter 4 to talk about Jesus because he's listening to a woman who's saying, I can't even believe you're talking to me. Why are you talking? You and I are not supposed to talk because the premise of religion says, I'm a Samaritan and you're a Jew and we shouldn't have dealings. He didn't tell her, be quiet with that nonsense. It's not the skin, it's the sin. He listened to her. So to me, it's ridiculous to not talk about these issues. And by the way, I don't like when people use, these positions. The more we talk about it, the more it's a problem. It doesn't stop them from talking about abortion and homosexuality and politics from the pulpit with very little Bible many times. They don't have a problem talking about that. But now all of a sudden, let's not talk. Nobody wants to talk about something that they're guilty of. That's me included. Because that means I've got to leave myself wide open to say, I have a problem with this. But how in the world do we get better if we don't talk about it? And I believe we have to talk about it.
Or if you view and look at yourself and say, well, I might not have a problem with this, but if you honestly evaluate and look at your church, you say maybe 70% of my church does have a problem with it. It's a whole lot easier to bypass that issue and say, maybe we don't need to talk about this because if I offend 70% of the people in my audience, what's that going to do to next Sunday's attendance, especially when there's a church right around the corner that is saying the opposite of what I'm saying right now. So, I mean, it's a fear, but that fear, we're not called to a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. And if it's right to speak about, as you're mentioning, then we need to be addressing this issue. I appreciate you speaking about this. And this is not a new conversation that you've been having. This is something that you've been talking about within your local church and within the community of Christ for many, many years, and something that you've really spearheaded in what we refer to as COEBA, right? COEBA. This is the Conference of Evangelizing Black America. And it's an amazing conference. I'm excited about being involved with the conference coming up in 2022. It's going to be in July. Is that correct?
First full week in July.
Okay, so for our audience that's not familiar with this conference, can you tell our audience a little bit about this conference?
Okay, Conference on Evangelizing Black America. The name came later, but the vision and the heartbeat started as I referred to my dad, going to church, getting saved, then surrendering to preach and seeing where are people that look like me. In other words, this is so good. I want everybody that looks like me to have what I have, but I can't get them to come because of racial barriers. So God said, why don't you do something about it? If you know the truth and you look like people that you want to have the truth, why don't you utilize who God made you and what God has given you to impact people that look like you and then teach them, because they respect you, because you look like them, that this is not about what you look like, it's about who God is. So when he planted the church in 1981 in a banquet room of a Howard Inn hotel near Howard University, Northwest Washington, D.C., he started that church with that handful of charter members, planted the church. A couple years later, moved to Northern Virginia. The burden was, take the truth I got from a predominantly white church. Who cares where I got it from? It's the word of God. And give it to people. Here's the amazing thing, Josh. When we were trying to advertise for our church, back then we used the Yellow Pages, when everybody's using Yellow Pages. We used to advertise in the Yellow Pages under Independent Baptist Church. And for a while, all of the people that visited our church, for the most part, were white because they associated with Independent Baptist, which is a novel concept among Black people. Years later, God said to my dad, advertise under Baptist, put Independent Fundamental or Independent Baptist on your ad, but put your picture. We got more Black people to visit Crossroads Baptist Church from the Yellow Pages back then than we did from all of our outreach combined. You know what it said to him? They may not even know what Independent Baptist is, may not even care, but they identify with that Black face. And it said to us, people are looking for somewhere where they're comfortable. So what COVID eventually ended up being was a burden in his heart to see Black men raised up that would go out and plant local New Testament churches, and that those churches would reach all people, particularly reaching Blacks who people were saying they could not reach. And now they're being reached. And then we take those Blacks and incorporate them into the Great Commission task force of evangelizing the world. That's been our goal since 1994. 26, 27, or 28 or so churches have been planted out of our church. We want to see more young men out there. We want to see more older men out there. It's a burden, but it's tough for some of these guys because when they step out into this arena and try to, you deal with Blacks that all immediately have this stigma in their mind. And so sometimes it's almost like they feel like you're coming to teach us, but you coming to teach us some white man's religion because of what they felt and sensed all these years. And to this day, I get calls from Blacks that are in these churches around the country. I go into a church and preach. I can't get out the building good for the Blacks are coming up and be telling me, we hear this all the time. Do they know how terrible it is for them to say we have an old-fashioned day? We're overalls singing, I wish I was in the Dixieland in the cotton field. Do they know how we don't want to show up for a day like that? There's a man used to be in our church. He said, there are people in church who will not give to offering when I pass the plate. This is not in 1935 or in the 2000s, So we hear this, the jokes, the comments, their kids, election year comes up and comments made and this, that, and the other stuff about their hair and stuff like this is stuff that we've just dealt with for years because it's just part of what it is. COBA hopefully breaks down those barriers, not only for Blacks to understand what New Testament Christianity is, but to bring information to other churches so they can understand what people are thinking and saying and we can join hands and hearts to work together.
See, that's what I'm excited about right there too. Every time I've seen advertisements, every time I've seen promotion for COBA, I've thought, man, that's so exciting that Kenny's doing that. And then I notice the vast majority of people that attend that conference are Black. And in my mind, of course. And you said to me pre-COVID, just about a year and a half ago, he said, Josh, you said to me, I don't know if you'll remember, you say, Josh, have you ever wondered why only Black pastors come to my conference to evangelize Black America? It's not a conference for Black pastors to evangelize Black America. It's a conference on evangelizing Black America. Why isn't that white pastors come? And I thought to myself, of course. And then the Holy Spirit hit my heart. You never went. And it's amazing because I had to think through why in the world? And I began to think at that moment, the moment you have COBA reopened, which is July of 2022, I plan on going myself. And I want to challenge those pastors that are listening right now. We have a responsibility to evangelize the entirety of our nation. And God has given us an amazing, beautiful, multicultural, multi-ethnic society, and we need to reach the entirety of it. Now, I may not know all the details about how to reach every segment, but I have a friend. His name is Kenny. Kenny knows how to reach a segment of society I don't know how to reach as well as he does. So I'm going to go to his conference. I'm going to say, what do I need to know? How can I be involved? Who do I need to support? Where do I need to send my money? And I want to encourage the pastors listening, hey, show up, meet me up. In fact, I'm even considering doing an official idea meetup right there for the conference, maybe the day before, maybe the day after, maybe part. But I want to encourage you to come out and find out what Kenny and his entire tribe are doing within our the Baptist movements that we're all involved with. I'm excited about COBA, and I'm excited about being out there with you. And what would you say about that? What do you say to the guys who are listening who have never been? Can I come? Should I come?
Please come. And I think sometimes, here's how we feel. We feel like when we're having this conference and we only get us. By the way, there was a time when we were having it way back. We were spending $60,000 to put on a conference, renting out a facility elsewhere from our church. And we did a magazine every year, and we sent it out to all these Baptist churches all over America. You know what we found out? We spent all this money, they're not coming. It was almost like we felt they were saying, y'all have a conference on evangelizing Black America? Go get them. That's y'all problem. And here in our minds, we're going, no, we're actually doing it. It's your problem. When Black people come in our church, they see all white people on the wall as missionaries. What Black do people see when they come to your church? So our folks are going, people come in our church, look, we support 150, 175 to 200 missionaries a year. Our folks aren't concerned about whether or not we're exclusively sending all our money. Our church runs about 400 people and in the middle of the pandemic, we had missions, couldn't even have a whole missions conference in May. And our commitment is at about $385,000 a year for 400 people. So why is it okay for us to lead our people in a commitment to evangelize the world for all these years, over $12 million in the history of our church given to missions in 30 years? Why is it okay that we lead our people to do that, and not okay that people come and let us lead them into leading their church into evangelizing Black America? And I know pastors that will travel across the world to sit in an event and be a part of it and would never consider coming to COBA. And to me and to my dad, who have been out there on the circuit giving our lives for the cause of Christ for whoever will come all these years, it's a little hurtful when you can't get the same response. And it's almost like somebody's gonna get mad with me, but it's almost like some people think, I'm not coming to a conference that's led by Black people and have y'all tell us what to do.
Well, it would only make sense if we're gonna reach Black America. I think it would be a good idea to ask the person that is our friend who leads in Black America to say, hey, maybe we should consider these things. And there may be some listening right now, right, that are thinking, I didn't even think. Well, now that you are aware, this is good. This is good. You're aware. maybe you should be involved with this. And now we can reach out and go to the conference and say, okay, Brother Kenny, you're our friend. Tell us how to evangelize Black America, and we'll do it. And we trust each other. Listen, I know the hundreds and hundreds that are listening right now. You like Kenny. You love him. You trust him. All right, let's go see what he has to say about this. And we'll reach more souls with the gospel. And everybody agrees with this one point, no matter what you agreed with or disagreed with. We all believe Jesus is the answer and the gospel is the answer. Fantastic. Let's get Jesus and the gospel to every people group by listening to our pal who's going to help us figure out how to do that better within one community. So I'm excited that you're listening to this and agreeing with both Kenny, Drew, and myself.
Well, it's, that's a good way to bring us all together, right? Because we know that it works, and we know we're going to all be together in heaven.
There you go.
So we might as well get working on it right now.
Kenny, thank you so much for joining us. Man, we really enjoyed this conversation. I'm excited. Maybe we do another one pretty soon. Who knows how this goes, depending on if Drew lets us bring on another guest. I've been bringing on a lot of guests lately, huh?
For sure. Brother Baldwin, I'd love to hear before we let you go, just if you've talked about a lot about this COBA conference, where can our listeners go to find out more about this and sign up for it?
Well, look, we'll be back up and going next summer. Everything has just been kind of on hold for us for this last summer, and our facility, we just don't feel comfortable jumping back in. Sure, contact our church or contact our website and go on our website at ourcrossroads.org, O-U-R crossroads.org, or call our church directly. Reach out to me. A number of these pastors that are out there that we've sent out, they could come out to your church or preach or share their burden. Just let you know how God has used them. Because honestly, one of the biggest setbacks when you talk about evangelizing Black America is a lack of resources. Here we are 40 years. This September, we celebrate 40 years at our church this September. And there are limited resources when it comes to piano players and things like that. I go to churches with 50 people, they got 5 piano players. Here we've been at church, we have 40 years and with 1 or 2. It's just college students don't graduate from these Bible colleges and run to these churches like this, but they could. If our leaders in our country said, some of you ought to go to Bible college and think, maybe God, after Bible college, wants me to go out and serve in one of those churches and be a blessing, and God could use me to help evangelize Black. So those are things, as we talk and we communicate, that we can dialogue with one another about and help each other get the job done, because it's all about God's kingdom. And if we don't know the need, we certainly can't take the lead.
I appreciate it, Kenny. Thank you so much. You can also go to the ideanetwork.church website. We're going to have some information on some meetups we want to do in 2022. If it's not there at late August when this episode comes out, it certainly will be there within the fall period. So if you are thinking in your mind, hey, Josh, I'm really thinking about going out there with you in July of 2022, contact me personally or check the Idea Network website. We're going to be talking about a meetup there during COBA. We're going to have a great time learning how we can evangelize Black America. Thanks again, Kenny. We appreciate you being on with us today.
Thank you all, and God bless you.
Thanks so much for listening to today's Idea Talks. If you would like to reach out to us, drop us an email at joshtice@ideanetwork.church. If you benefited from this podcast, we ask that you take a moment to show your support by subscribing, rating, and reviewing the podcast on iTunes. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you right here again at the Idea Talks podcast.